Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery preparing to check in on my VermiBag Mini. And it was last time when we checked in here that I was showing everybody how we had wrapped the system with some bubble wrap to try to limit the amount of moisture that gets released out into the air through the sides of the fabric container. And there's another piece of material that I've already taken off, which is really there to protect from moisture exiting the system through the lid, which actually has a pretty good size vented screen on it. And that's this piece of plastic which I've already removed. And I've already zipped open the container, preparing for today's check-in. As you can see, I've got the yummy assortment of frozen foods over there, ready to feed them with. I've also got my grid over there. There's a little bit of coffee as well. This system's been in service now for 94 days, and it's been 11 days since the last check-in, at which time we gave them feeding number 7. Today's feeding will be number 8. And I don't recall if we've talked about the population size after about 3 months of being in service. I don't think I've been seeing any recent comments on the video for when we released the worms into the system. So I don't think that number is going to change much, but it is kind of subject to change depending on whether people are still kicking in estimates. You know, at some point I'll just stop taking those estimates and stop averaging a calculated figure for the worm count in here. But I think that that number is pretty much what we're going to go with at this point. There is a pretty nice assortment of different types of foods in here for them. And the coffee filter, in which we've got a day's worth of coffee, can come in here to replace the existing feeding zone indicator, which it looks like the worms have been chewing on a little bit. I don't think it would be too difficult to locate where we last fed in a system like this. It's pretty much always going to be down the middle. But I like to position these coffee filters over where the feeding was and then refer to them as my feeding zone indicators. But when they get, chewed up like this, it's time to just utilize it as bedding in the system. So we've got some kind of novelty objects floating around down in here, a whole bunch of pumpkin stems. And at this point, we're only a couple days away from this year's celebration of Halloween. And once that holiday comes and goes, people will eventually be looking to get rid of the jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkins that they have been decorating their homes with. And then those things will start popping up out on the curb, and that's at that point that I'll do what I did last year, which is to cruise the neighborhood looking for people who have put out their pumpkins, and then I'll see if I can try to claim some of them to become worm food. And that's what I did last year. And that's where all these pumpkin stems came from. A whole bunch of different pumpkins that I gathered. Pretty much all from one single house that had a whole bunch of pumpkins decorating the property out front. And I just scooped up a whole bunch of them. All of them that still seemed to be in good shape. I grabbed them, threw them in the back of my vehicle, and brought them down here into my wormery and gradually started feeding them to the worms one by one. Doing away with all of them, all but one. There's still one pumpkin, believe it or not, remaining from last Halloween. And it sits right over here beneath my bench. And I check it every now and then just to make sure it's not starting to break down and deteriorate. If it were to start getting mushy and soft, that would be my clue that it's time to hack it up into little bits and feed it to the worms. I mean, the fact that it's been sitting around here for a year, just by itself, kind of makes me want to keep going with the experiment. Not that it's a formal experiment of any sort, but it is almost starting to seem like an experiment to see how long that pumpkin can actually survive without starting to show signs of breakdown. So we've got some worms hanging out in here. I guess the one thing I was really looking to do was to try to get a sense of moisture in this system, to see what it feels like, because I was really curious to see if the moisture retention efforts that I implemented with wrapping the system with plastic were going to help. And I got to admit, I did sort of sense a little bit of, I don't know, like the smell of moisture kind of when I open this thing up. A little different from what I recall. And things do feel nice and damp. Not quite as dry as they were. Sometimes it seems like if I'm able to flip what's in my hand, I see just a whole bunch of worms at the bottom of the pile. So now, the other thing, what was I just had something in mind, and I totally had a totally had a lapse of what I was thinking there. What the heck did I want to say? Let me focus for a second. We'll look at some of these worms hang out one more time. I remember. It was corn cobs. I wanted to check out how these corn cobs over here are doing. See if I'm able to help them get to the breakdown process quicker by snapping them, if I can, if they've given enough already. This one looks like it's already been snapped, meaning maybe it's come to the point where we could try to crumble it. Here's another one that's still cylindrical in shape. As you can see, the worms really like working the middle of it out, because there's a nice little juicy tender middle portion to a corn cob that the worms gravitate towards in the beginning. And they'll eventually break it all down, but they eat off everything they can that's soft and easy to eat in the beginning, gradually working their way to the tougher portions. So here and there's little pockets of worms hanging out, and I still feel like I'm bumping into portions of our little collection of pumpkin stem. Some of them are bigger than others. Some of them are starting to break apart. And I don't know. My tendency is to generally want to leave them be and let them break down at their own pace instead of helping them too much. Although, you know, with a potential replenishment of my supply of this stuff right around the corner, maybe it is time to start helping this stuff along so that we can begin phasing in the next season's worth of stuff. So I did make myself a promise to not dig too deep into this system, because when we populated this system with these worms that are in here, these worms came out of my yellow buckets that had been in service for 6 months, housing these worms for a period of time to kind of see if we can promote some breeding and some expansion of the population in those buckets. Whether or not we actually had that, I don't know, but we did have a couple buckets, a few buckets that had a really nice collection of castings in them. In fact, what was in those buckets was almost entirely all castings, and that's how we got this system started, was by loading it up with the contents of those buckets. So what's at the bottom of this system doesn't really look like what's out here on the top. What's out on the top has been getting periodic check-ins and feedings and replenishment of the supply of bedding. So I think this is a pumpkin stem, and it's just shattering in my hand. It's so soft and crumbly. So perhaps this will be the first pumpkin stem to really go, if that's what it is. I can't even tell for sure. So yeah, I don't want to, you know, end up contaminating what's down low. A nice batch of almost, you know, entirely finished off castings with all kinds of shrapnel, little bits of leaves and paper and everything. I'd rather have that stuff near the surface so the worms can focus on breaking that stuff down up here near the surface and leave what's down low alone, basically, so that it it can at some point in the near future get harvested, because these systems get harvested by just opening up a hatch on the bottom and dropping out what's down at the very bottom. And it would be a shame to litter that stuff with all kinds of stuff other than worm castings. So that's the main reason I've been wanting to just focus on not contaminating that stuff and keep it clean. So let's drop in what we've got for them here today. It's a nice assortment of different types of veggies and maybe some fruit. I don't even know for sure what's in here. I'm going to see about getting every last bit out of this transport container down into the worm bin. You can see there's even a little chunk of citrus here. There's tomato, there's pepper, there's scallion onion bits. I believe these little chunks over here are potato peel with a good bit of the potato still adhering to it. That's some lettuce that was sitting around for a while. Luckily there was still a little bit of good lettuce down at the heart of the head. But what was on the outside was already starting to really deteriorate and had to go. So I'm sprinkling in a little bit of pulverized eggshell, which is grit when you put it into a worm bin. And now I've got my prepared bedding here, which is shredded cardboard and paper with some leaves mixed in and then some moisture to get it all nice and damp and soft. So I figured I'd drop that in here on top. I probably should have dropped it in on the bottom. That would normally be the method that I use, is kind of laying down a foundation of bedding onto which I place the fresh foods, but I wasn't really paying that much attention and I overlooked that little step. And then we can start bringing in some of this stuff. And as you can see, we use some dry leafy material out here on the surface as sort of a top dressing. But my idea was to take what's out here already and has been in the bin for a while now and blend it in with the surrounding materials to get it all into service. And I've got my box with which we can apply just a little bit more. So between the prepared bedding that went down in on top of the foods, combined with a little bit of top dressing type leafy material, I think that'll be a nice supplement to the bedding supply here in this system. This looks like it's the outer skin of a piece of cantaloupe melon, stripped clean of all the yummy fleshy portions of the melon, leaving behind only the outer skin, which is a little bit tougher, but it too will, just like everything else, eventually get broken down. And since I've been treating this bottom edge of the view window as sort of my indicator of where I'd like my level to be in here, nothing says I can't go beyond that level and go higher, but when it's below that, I feel like I'd like to try to come close to keeping it at that level if possible. Looks like we brought in a pretty good sized stick, which I'm going to just pull out right there. And I think by leveling this stuff off, it's going to create a little bit of a dry, I don't know, surface out here. And you know, my watering can is right here within reach. I recently reloaded it and pumped it up with pressure, so let's see. Yep, there is some pressure in there, so as long as it's already spraying here, we might as well use this as an opportunity to rinse anything that might have accumulated on my glove, get it right back down into the system where it belongs. It'll limit the amount of stuff that I end up sending down the drain over at the sink. And then we'll come back in with the plastic covering that's, you know, protecting the material right here at this level. Kind of making me wonder if it's even very necessary to protect the entire container and the big piece of plastic I've been draping over the top. But it seems like if any little bit of humidity does sort of escape from around the plastic that's resting here on the surface, then, you know, perhaps we're capturing it by having the vent, the mesh screen vent at the very top of the container on the lid. closed off too to prevent the air from getting in there. I don't know, maybe I went overboard with that. Perhaps it is sufficient just to have the bottom, you know, covering across the surface of the material to prevent moisture loss. But it doesn't take a whole lot just to simply drape out the plastic covering on the top and just give it that little bit of extra protection just in case there is, you know, a little bit of moisture escaping from around this piece of plastic. So that's it. That's our check-in with our now 94-day VermiBag Mini with the red wigglers in it. The system seems to be doing quite nicely. And I do feel like maybe the moisture retention has been improved a little bit. But it certainly doesn't hurt to add a little bit here and there either, which is something we could do if we don't feel that the plastic protection is doing enough. We can always supplement the moisture content. All right, everyone, that's it for the check-in. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now. Almost forgot. Feeding zone indicator. I know. Seems silly. But it is kind of tradition. So I'm sticking to it. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Bye again.